I would like to kick things off by saying hello, everyone. My name is Ciel Vaughan and I'm from Share Screen Africa. We facilitate virtual events to help bring experts into classrooms all over Africa. So I want to say a big welcome to everyone for our second installment of the series Exploring East Africa's Wildlife Economy. This is Dialogue 2, Wild Oils. And we are very lucky and excited to have our wonderful speakers and facilitator here to help us explore this topic a bit further and have a really great discussion in conjunction with the African Wildlife Economies Institute. So thank you so much for joining. I hope we have a really exciting discussion, and I'm going to hand over to our facilitator, Reinhard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us for this very noble and timely discussions around what we should have done as soon as yesterday. We welcome all of you, and today we have very wonderful speakers who are very knowledgeable in this particular field, and we look forward to having a very candid discussions with you, and crossing fingers that it will lead to something bigger, both on our side and on your side as well. So I will let our speakers introduce themselves, so then we'll have a brief presentation from their side, and then we jump into the Q&A. So number one, just have fun. We look forward to having gaining more knowledge, and if you do have any question, the chat box is open. So I'll open the floor to our speakers to maybe briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll start right on with the first presentation. So I'll start with Hilary, then Zara. Hilary?
Hello, yes, I'm Hilary Somalata. I live in Kenya. I am a Kenyan, and I am, my focus is on the Kenyan species of frankincense and myrrh, which we collect up in the north of Kenya. And we have a distillation plant up on the slopes of Mount Kenya where we distill the essential oils. Reinhard, would you like me to do my presentation, or this is just a brief introduction?
Maybe a brief introduction. I'll give the floor to
I'll
Zara.
hand over to Zara.
Yeah, great. And then, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity, first of all, to share and to learn. My name is Zara Osman Gele, and I am from Somaliland. We run a small company in Somaliland that specializes in wild products, in the trade of wild products out of Somaliland. And yes, we work a lot with quite a portfolio of what is generically called frankincense products. But we are developing the portfolio of wild oils quite rapidly, I would say. Thank you very much.
Very much. And myself, I'm Reinhard, the spanner boy for this discussion. So I'll hand over the floor to Hilary for the first presentation.
Well, hi, everybody, and very welcome. Myrrh, and these come from Commiphora and Boswellia species. They're very dryland species, and they occupy vast expanses in East Africa. And the main form of land use here is pastoralism. Now, you get many different types of species of frankincense and myrrh trees. They occur in Nigeria and Ethiopia, India, Oman, Yemen, Kenya, Somalia, Somaliland, Uganda, Tanzania, and Namibia. And so the harvest of these gums always involves these pastoralists, collectors, and they earn a lot of money from quite a wild, abundant resource, and it offers an alternative form of land use to pastoralism. Now, as these areas are pretty dry, the pastoralists do suffer from periodic droughts and sometimes heavy floods, and they may lose their whole sole source of livelihood. So earning an income from these wild plants, which are not so affected by extremes of weather, can be quite a lifesaver. So I'm going to, so mainly the trade is in a better known and widely traded species from Somalia and Oman and India. And so my focus is on the lesser known frankincense species of Boswellia neglecta and Commiphora confusa. And we have myrrh species from Commiphora cataf, Commiphora holtziana, and Kua. Now, I just wanted to mention that unlike the sort of traditions in Somaliland, collection of these gums and resins is a relatively recent phenomenon. So on a commercial scale, they did trade in gum arabic, but very little in frankincense and myrrh. So I would say, in a sense, that we are pioneers in this respect. So they were traditionally using it in very small quantities as an incense, perfumes, which they might burn in their houses to get rid of any bad smells or anything like that. And then the Samburu people, the men, used it in their circumcision ceremonies, where they would collect the hard resin and put it on the ends of their arrows to stun birds to collect the feathers for their headdresses. And this was an indication of that they had just passed their circumcision ceremony. So I just want to, you'll see the similarities to our harvest, and actually probably be quite interesting that there are fundamental differences. So let me begin with the areas and the habitat. So this is a sort of dry land. In our areas in Samburu County, it's quite mountainous, and the foothills of these mountains is where the Boswellia species occur. And the Boswellia, the Commiphora confusa, occurs more on the sort of flatlands. So here is a typical hill where the Boswellias Amanyata, and that is the traditional dwellings of the Samburu people. This is a hill that I visited with some of the collectors, and they're coming down from the hill. So they generally live quite close to where the hills are. This is a typical Boswellia woodland, which you'll find on top of the hills. And it's pretty dry. And so that's the Boswellia neglecta. Next slide, please. Here you see on the flat land, this is the Commiphora confusa woodland. Here's the gum, which is produced by Boswellia neglecta. And I just want to mention that this gum, unlike with the other species of frankincense, these trees are not tapped at all. So they are produced, the tree produces the gum in response to the activity of larvae. So here you see, we peeled away the gum, and here you see the larvae going along the surface of the bark, eating the bark. And this produces copious amounts of black resin, which covers the insect. So when the insect is ready to pupate, it bores into the wood, and then the gum dries, and then that is when the collectors collect. So here you see the scar from insect activity. These trees are very regenerative, and so these wounds heal over pretty quickly. So here we have the other species of frankincense, which is Commiphora confusa. And again, we have exactly the same situation where a larvae of a different species, this is a cerambicid species, is also inducing a tree to produce resin. Now, this association between insects and gum production has been going on for millennia. And so what you'll see here is a very interesting thing, is that the longhorn beetle from the cerambicid family actually builds its cocoon inside the resin. So this association has been going on for a very, very long time. So there we have it emerging. The insect is emerging from its cocoon. So here we have the adult cerambycid longhorn beetle hatching, and then the cycle continues. So here we have so that means that this, because the trees are not tapped, this form of gum production and harvest is completely sustainable. You cannot induce the tree to produce gum through tapping. It simply won't produce it. It has to have the insect. So here we have the collectors collecting along the branches on the trunks these lumps of resin. That means that they'd only need to visit a tree once. It's unlike a situation perhaps in Somaliland, which Zara will explain to you, of having to tap the tree and then go back repeatedly about 9 times over several weeks until the tree produces the right quantity and the quality. Here, the gum is readily produced by these insects. So the people just have to go around from tree to tree collecting the gum when it's dry. So it means that, and this particular collector said that she managed to collect about 10 kilos in one day. So that's quite a lot for that time. Here we have the collector collecting the resin from Commiphora confusa, something quite similar. So I just wanted to mention that the collectors are mainly women, and this is again different to what you find in other frankincense harvested. It's about 99% women who do the collection. So once they've collected, they store the resins in their maniatas, which you saw in the second slide, and they bring it to the purchase center. We have to, because there's very little network, we have to send out a message 2 weeks in advance and the word is then spread around to come on a particular day. So we set up camp quite nearby, about 100, 200 meters on a lugger, which is a dry riverbed. And then the next morning they come in with their donkeys, and then we are ready to weigh the produce, pack it, and pay. So typically we get about 78 collectors coming in one time. And if we give them 2 weeks notice, they can collect about 2.4 tons. So the collection range is between 2 kilos per collection family or 133 or 150 kilos. Here we have, we do training. We have to train them in sustainable harvesting. Although the harvest is sustainable, we do say they should not damage the trees or cut the trees in any way. We also tell them to store the trees in clean areas and little places in the forks of trees. We also tell them to use clean containers. We use posters because most of the collectors are illiterate. So they are explained the whole process in the vernacular Samburu language. So here we have the whole day, even though there may be about 78 collector groups, we have to record, and then we have to pay, and everything it's all traceable. We have these purchase seats, so we know exactly what each collector has earned and how much they've earned and how much they've been paid. So here everything is ready and packed in sacks, ready to be loaded onto the pickup, or sometimes we need a truck to take it to the distillation plant on the slopes of Mount Kenya. This is about 6 or 7 hours away. So these areas are quite remote. So I just want to briefly say that we are organic and Fair Wild certified. Fair Wild means that we pay fair prices and that the harvest is sustainable. So this is basically just a validation. We do have community projects, some sort of benefit sharing. We divide the collector groups up into small groups, and they then are given money to buy livestock or to perhaps open a shop, which then benefits that little community. It has become received with great joy, and it is actually quite popular. They can buy livestock. This is something that's quite interesting because the men are usually the livestock owners and the women are not. So this is something where they can use livestock. It's a renewable source of income and they can earn money from it. So in our community, it is basically the women who are benefiting from this particular project. So we hope that it can expand and it can benefit bigger communities. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand over to Reinhard.
Thank you very much, Hilary, for your presentation. I think at this stage, I'll hand over to Zara to make a presentation, then we jump into the gist of the discussion. Zara.
All right, thank you very much. So good morning again, everyone. And again, thank you for the invitation to join the session. Let me maybe dive straight into sharing a bit of our story. Neobotanica is a company based in Somaliland, which is in the northwestern part of Somalia. It's an autonomous region which considers itself an independent state with its own governing institutions. Neobotanica is run by myself and my two siblings. We started exporting gums and resins almost 30 years ago. And about 10 years ago, we set up what is still the only commercial size processing unit for the production of frankincense, myrrh, and opoponax essential oils. In the last couple of years, we added the extraction of fixed oils from other plants to the operation. So our roots lie in the trade of frankincense. This is a historical trade, though, that very much predates Neobotanica by centuries. These products are integral to our cultural, religious, medicinal, and economic practices. To this day, frankincense is still a significant resource. In fact, it is the second most important foreign income earner for the country after livestock exports to the Middle East. I would say that the only major way the trade of gums and resins has changed is in the modern management of the local supply chain, which helps us demonstrate the sustainability of the trade with, for example, the Fair Wild certification. So with this slide, I just wanted to show the multitude of products that we work with and are generally called generally and generically called frankincense. These products are actually very distinct botanically, and even within the Boswellias, the Carteri, Revive, Reveriana are all Boswellias, but they're very different. They have very different scents and character when distilled. Commiforas are actually another family altogether, and Gum Arabic is an acacia, which is used for other uses than the production of oils. As far as the extraction of essential oils is concerned, Boswellia carteri is the most popular, And, you know, for the purpose of our talk here, when I will refer to it as frankincense. And most of the time when I talk about frankincense, it actually, it's about Boswellia carteri specifically. So local knowledge about the properties and benefits of frankincense, the gum resin, but the oil as well, is actually and has been backed by science. And this is why frankincense is sought after globally for use in many industries, which I have listed here. So apart from the gums and resins producing trees, I just wanted to further demonstrate the sheer diversity of plant resources in the wild, in what are in fact, as Hilary was mentioning, semi-arid lands. That you think there's not much that would grow in those dry, arid lands, but they are very rich in botanical resources. And we're currently working on the production of fixed oils from the seeds and fruit of several unrelated wild plants, such as these three. And we're developing the supply chains and bringing new products, even though it's very time consuming and costly. But we know it is necessary to do so in order to fulfill the diversification that ensures sustainable resilience. So here I just noted some challenges working with wild products. The challenges of working with wild products are connected to both locally and external constraints. On international markets, the utilization of wild and naturally occurring plant resources is still really to gain understanding. And this relative lack of awareness impacts on the legal and regulatory frameworks, the market dynamics and the access to buyers, and the balance between economic development and environmental conservation, as well as social equity. Sustainable wild plant utilization really requires a holistic approach that considers socioeconomic factors and landscape conservation. In Somaliland, there is an added challenge of the limited infrastructure and technology, which impede economic opportunities for what are very remote communities, and which hinders development and diversification. We see at Neobotanica, we see diversification as really the driver and the backbone of our business and livelihood resilience model. We see diversification as necessary for an economy based on wild harvests. Trading in gums and resins gives us all, by all I mean all the stakeholders along the supply chain, gives us exposure to diverse markets, and adapting to regulations governing wild harvest gives us an understanding of legal frameworks. And our Fair Wild certification has helped us a lot in this sense. The diversification of income generating sources from wild products ensures the regular incomes and the spreading of risks. And the active trade in general, I would say, creates bonds amongst communities who become reliant on each other for their welfare, and this enhances social cohesion. This is very important for us. We see trade as preventing conflict. Now, lastly, maybe diverse species and products enable ecosystems and economies to better adapt to changes and challenges and ensure long-term sustainability. I'll stop there. That's it for my presentation. I noted some significant differences that Hilary also pointed to in terms of the actual tapping methods and harvest of the gums and resins. Yes, it's true in Somaliland. Tapping is done on the trees. The tapping is done by shaving. It's actually not an incision like most people think. It's a shaving of the trunk and the large branches of the tree to stimulate gum production. And it is done by men in Somaliland because the areas where the production of frankincense occurs are very remote. There are no villages nearby, and they are very high up. This happens in altitude for frankincense. As Hilary said, myrrh is different. Myrrh occurs on the dry plains. Similarly, only frankincense tree will typically only produce about 1 to 1.5 kilos per season. And there are only about, at most, 2 seasons. Really, there's one main season for harvest. And depending on the weather, there could be another season. But generally, it's just 1 season. So a tree will only produce about 1 kilo and 1.5 kilos of gum. We do train the harvesters not in terms of how to harvest and how to tap trees, because that is a tradition that they know even better than us. They know better than us how to tap trees. But what we do insist on is that they give trees a rest. So when one tree is tapped 1 year, that tree gets rest for the next year. So there's a lot of field extension work that occurs. In fact, right now, at the moment, we have been, for a few months now, we have been in the field a lot, working on what are the best ways for the communities to implement the Fair Wild Premium. So that's also a huge investment. Thank you very much, Reinhard. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Zara and Hilary, and I love your final statements. And having mentioned the aspect of sustainability and the role of Fair Wild, to Zara, how do you see the contribution of those kind of traditional and customary practices in terms of maintaining the sustainability of harvesting not only franciscan, but then all other wild plants or wild oil-based plants? How do you see the role of these kind of traditional systems in enhancing the sustainability, maybe from a challenges perspective or an opportunity perspective?
Yeah, I think because frankincense is such a traditional product, there is a lot of value attached to it locally, because there is a local use for it. Yes, it's a product which we export and has always been exported since the pharaohs and the Egyptian pharaohs, but there is also a local use of it, much more so than in some other countries that I have seen who have varieties of frankincense. A typical Somali household will burn frankincense in their home every single day, and probably several times a day. So it has that value locally. And I think that provides it protection and ensures its sustainability. But I would say that generally, and this is why we are very interested in providing, commercializing the products from the wild. As soon as a tree and its nuts or seeds or leaves become important commercially, that provides protection for it because people earn a living from it. So we see the commercialization of these products as a way to also ensure their sustainability.
Thank you very much, Zara. Now to Hilary. I believe you've also maybe in one way or the other engaged Fairwild, and in Zara's presentation, of course, there's a whole discussion presentation about the role that entities like Fairwild play around these issues. So, based on your experiences, Hilary, how would you maybe position or emphasize the role of Fairwild in terms of promoting this sustainable use of these natural plants, Hilary?
I think it's basically a stamp of approval. It's a certificate. It authenticates what we may say. So you can claim many things about frankincense harvest. You can say it's sustainable, but unless you have this certification, which is an internationally approved document, that is basically, as I said, the stamp of approval. So I just out of interest, I was in a trade fair in Paris and in cosmetic, and the aspect of sustainability was quite a strong feature in that because of some of that bad press from some of the other, frankincense harvesting has received bad press. And so I think it's very important, especially, as Zara says, in her situation, it is a sort of certificate of authentication, verification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, but all I can say is that although it might verify what we're doing, there's, in my case, there's no company that actually supports us. So Fairwild should be, it should be a sort of contribution from the producer as well as from the buyer. So none of our buyers do support us in that way. They should support us for the community projects, but which they don't. So that has to come out of our own pocket. However, I think it's still very important because of the issues of sustainability are big issues at the moment.
Thank you very much. I think both of you, and for the sake of the audiences, this session is open for anyone with a comment or any question. You can post on the chat box or raise your hands. But then from both presentations, we can see the importance of the connotation of the traditional practices or cultural values to this kind of economic importance of wild oil, so to speak. And I think all of us can attest to the fact that, especially from Kenya, when you mention about the whole utilization of wild species, everyone jumps straight to wildlife, technically the animal aspect and all that. So a question to both of you, starting maybe from Hilary, then Zara. How do you see the role of this kind of traditional connotation, the cultural attributes or the non-market values to this kind of plant oil, harvesting this kind of wildlife species? How do you see the role of the cultural connotation of the non-market values and market values to what now both of you are pushing for? Because we've experienced a lot of challenges in the past here. Hilary, then Zara?
Yeah, so I just want to say, I did mention that it's actually quite a new phenomenon. It's not something that goes back thousands of years. So I would say, and since the 2000 actually, it's really only started. So, however, it has taken off, and you know, so it does fit in, of course, because culturally the Samburu people are there as their pastoralists. They're moving around with their livestock, and they can also collect sort of, you know, opportunistically. So if they've got their livestock which are grazing amongst the trees, they can also collect it opportunistically.
Thank you so much, Zara. Maybe
yeah,
yes.
Reinhard, could you repeat your question again, please, for me?
In terms of, because I mean, maybe it's different in Somaliland, but then if you look at the aspect of the whole wildlife utilization, especially for economic purposes, the Kenyan conservation sector predominantly are very edgy about the whole issue because of the direct connotation or linkages between utilization and, you know, like hunting or wildlife, the animal species. So based on your experiences, and then those, because you mentioned the traditional importance or linkages between culture and the harvesting of Franciscan, how do we exploit this further in a way that there's strong understandings and all that? Yeah.
I see this issue as far as we're concerned, and being more of an issue with at the level of our markets, because in Somaliland, really everything is wild. There's cultivation of plants in the south, in Somalia, but in Somaliland, there is the agricultural sector is the livestock sector. Otherwise, everything, the fruit, the gums, resins, everything else is collected wild. And even the livestock sector is still at a nomadic level. It's subsistence nomadic. So even the livestock sector is not managed in a modern manner. The nomads are still roaming across the country, and so everything is wild. So we don't have the that issue between how do you exploit the wild, and should you and the issue between exploiting the wild and using something that is more modern, maybe in an agricultural, but we, apart from gums and resins that are tapped, as I said, all the other fruits, nuts, and products of the wild are just, like Hillary was explaining, are picked as and when passing nomads see them on the trees.
Yeah. Great. You both mentioned wildlife, and there's a question on the chat box about compatibility of course, livestock and the trade, or maybe harvesting like wild raisins and all that. So do you feel that they're compatible, Zara? The livestock and harvesting of this kind of wild species?
Yes, I have heard from time to time reports about goats being, for example, a threat to frankincense trees and the survival of frankincense trees. Generally, you will find that the areas that are on the lower ridges of these mountains are more accessible to people and animals, because herders go past with their animals, and generally those trees will be maybe tapped more, and also there might be some grazing. But the bulk of the resource is actually really too far up for anyone to reach. And the nomads that are passing by are not going to climb those mountains to find grazing for their animals.
Yeah.
So there is very little conflict. The sheer so Commiphora mira is on the plains, but these trees have developed in a way that no humans or animal can destroy them. Commiphora mira has thorns that are lethal. So there is no grazing that's going to be done on Commiphora mira. And even people have a hard time collecting the gum from myrrh because of the thorns. There is really, I would say, very, very little issue between animals and wild frankincense and myrrh.
Thank you very much for that. Now, there's a question on the chat box, and I will direct this to Hilary. In terms of course, harvesting oil from different plants, what normally happens to the byproducts or the waste material generated from the harvesting process? How would you use it, Hilary? Because I think you highlighted deeply around the harvesting process. How do you deal with the byproducts or the waste?
Okay, so we don't have to sort anything. We just buy the gum as it is collected and it's packed. So when we distill, we are producing the distillate, the perfume water. I'm afraid we can only use a very small amount of it, and the rest disappears into the soil. And we have a bougainvillea bush that seems to thrive on it. It produces huge quantities of enormous purple flowers. The waste gum, we then, because we have a wood burning boiler, which is a very hungry animal, because it has to generate a lot of pressure, steam, under high pressures. So we use that as we recycle the waste gum, we dry it, and we use it as fuel for otherwise. So that means that we don't have to use any other source of fuel. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Now, for my next question is related to Zara, and then maybe I'll rope in Frank into the discussion. Because the big debate around, including now what you're talking about today, is around the economics aspect of conservation. And we all know the people who pay the heavy cost of conservation are the local communities that I think, Zara, you mentioned are at the forefront in terms of harvesting and also in trade of these outcomes of products. So currently, there's a huge debate and interest around carbon markets or biodiversity credits, so to speak. So Zara, and then maybe Frank, you can also maybe add into this discussion. What role do you see in terms of the contribution of wild oil into the current discussion around carbon or biodiversity credit trade? Can we quantify it? And then the second part of this question would be the transparency and accountability mechanisms of this kind of financing systems or trade. How do we ensure that the local community benefit most from the value chain? So Zara, and maybe I can rope in Frank.
Wow, that's an interesting question. I must admit that I probably don't know enough about the carbon credit markets. The the times that I have come across people who ask me that question, who I try to find out information about, I felt that generally the people interested in those markets would want to spend their money on more accessible parts of the world, generally. Somaliland, even though we can certainly supply all the local knowledge that is necessary, and we can facilitate the studies that would be necessary locally. We have not found anyone who's interested enough that they will overcome the perceived challenges of coming to Somaliland. So we are, that's where we are at in terms of the carbon credit market. Honestly, lately I've also heard some very controversial reports about the carbon credit world. So it seems like there are so many people involved in that in those markets now that you have to be quite careful and have a lot of knowledge to be able to also make sure that you partner with the right people. That's my impression anyway.
Thank you so much, Frank. Do you feel the harvesting of this whale oil can play a role in addressing this rural poverty, especially for these communities? And from your experiences, what are some of the biggest challenges? Because Zara has mentioned, of course, anything good has the bad side of it. So Zara mentioned about the challenges around carbon credit or biodiversity credit, Frank. So what do you think the contribution of this whale oil to the whole carbon credit debate?
Okay, to get a carbon credit, you have to actually take carbon out of the system. And so in the plant side of that, that usually means planting new plants. And the common one you have in Kenya, Reinhard, is planting mangroves and getting a carbon credit for planting mangroves. So we're not here talking about planting frankincense trees. We're harvesting ones that are there. So the other way you could get a carbon credit in which is called Red Plus, is you could maybe be paid not to destroy the tree, not to take it down. And so then you could look at that and say, is there a threat that we could avoid? And maybe there's a possibility there. But I think the bigger story, Reinhard, is I think Zara said it so interestingly that Somaliland is a wildlife economy. That basically you're either harvesting wild resources directly, or if you will, indirectly through a free range of livestock industry, which then is also harvesting the wild plants and converting it to livestock. So what you'd want to say for communities at the local level, what is the portfolio of things you can do on the ground? Is it nuts? Is it fruit? Is it game meat? Is it ecotourism, and so on? And then on top of that, you might get some of these more sophisticated markets like the market for carbon credits, or what's being talked about now, a market for biodiversity credits. But I think the first point is to do exactly what Hillary and Zara are doing, is say, working with the communities to be able to commercialize the resources that they have there on the ground, to commercialize them, to harvest sustainably, and so on. And as they build that commercial acumen and so on, they can then look at what are some of the other things. So I'm waiting for Zara to come back with her nuts now, and we're going to get Somaliland nuts exported, because she mentioned that. And even wildlife-friendly beef. So in both cases, the livestock could be certified as a wildlife-friendly operation, if indeed it is, as has been discussed. So I wouldn't jump right to carbon. I'd say let's start with the plant economy, move it into the local animal economy. We haven't even got into the insects yet, and then look at other opportunities to tap into some of these big markets.
Great. Thank you so much. I think the biggest challenge has been around the way we communicate, especially around the science and policy to the larger public and the local communities. The biggest challenge, based on, I think, the discussions, has been how we package this information to different audiences that we target, from a policy level to the local level and academia and researchers. And it sounds that maybe I won't see it as a challenge per se, but I'll say is an opportunity. Now, the next question goes to Hilary and Deborah from Fairwild. Do we have potential, especially around the East African wild oils, in penetrating international markets? What would be that game changer to exploit the full potentials of East African wild oils? So Hilary and maybe Deborah?
Yeah, so I mean, everything really depends on markets. So, you know, if there are no markets, you can't fully exploit the potential of wild oils. So I think for us, that is possibly one of the biggest challenges, because throughout history and through tradition, Boswellia sacra and Boswellia Carteri and Boswellia, the ones from India, are all well known. So what we're trying to do is to penetrate a new market, penetrate a market which, and so we're trying to change a mindset for the buyers, for the perfumers, for the skincare formulators. So, you know, so there's a huge resource out there. As I mentioned, there are many, many different species of frankincense and myrrh which occur right across these arid lands, and yet there's only very few that are actually used, you know, in large quantities, and the rest are ignored. So there's an overutilization with some species and an underutilization with other species. So I think this is possibly one of the biggest challenges. Yeah.
Thank you. Deborah, what's the game changer? Do we have potentials?
Okay.
Well, Hilary is quite right. Of course, this is entirely market dependent. But, you know, ever the upside, we saw an explosion of demand for frankincense, for Boswellia, over the last 10 years, which then sort of peaked and stabilized. But now again, we're seeing a significant growth. So there are really two dynamics we need to look at as wildlife economy advocates. The one is the growth in demand as such, which we are seeing now over again, and it's sort of spread across a number of different products. So yes, the Boswellia, but also the other resins are seeing an increase, the coniferas, the gum arabic, and all of those. So I think the prospects for diversification are good. And furthermore, the other essential oils coming from other products such as baobab, for example, have also recently exploded. Now, this is very interesting. It's gone sort of from being a feature of the perfume market and, of course, incense and things like that, to having a broader appeal in the personal care market. So we at Fairwild, for example, recently were approached by a large German company, Evonik, which is working on baobab oil, for example. And this seems to have opened up the market for a rethink of the role of these oils, both in perfumes and in incense and things like that, but also in personal care, which is an enormous market. So there is an enormous prospect, and this is the moment, we would argue. The second dimension, however, is it's the sustainability dimension of that market. So yes, the frankincense market is huge and has been for a very, very long time, but how much of that has been focused on sustainability? And that is where we're seeing the real opportunities of the moment. People like Zara and Hilary, having been out there, were pioneers, the first people to be really looking at how do we do this sustainably, and that means in social and economic and cultural terms, and how do we do it? So we are, as Fairwild, I mean, these women are our heroes. They led the way, but now we are seeing that more and more companies, large brands, large producers, are starting to think about their supply chains and how these can be made sustainable. There's been a lot of pressure as well, especially around social concerns, and there's been a lot of pressure from EU buyers. So I think we're seeing a changing dynamic in the market, and I'm seeing a huge growth in interest. We have 5 or 6 potential clients on our books at the moment in that sector, for example. So there's everything to play for, but really kudos to your presenters today who have led the way.
Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
I'll give you, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Zara and
Reinhard?
Hilary, yes.
Yeah, if I may just add something. As part of our diversification model, you know, we diversify on every level. So it's a matter of, yes, diversifying products that we commercialize, but we diversify also at the level of markets. So when I'm talking about, for example, seeds and nuts, wild seeds and nuts, they are products that are already consumed locally. Therefore, for us, it's really important to not compete with the local consumption. They are products that are already important in the diet of the nomads. And so we will only we will work on producing more and accessing more and only accessing what is in excess of the demand of the local people. We're not going to be competing with the local demand because so what we can do locally is actually just improve the local market and bring products from the countryside to the city, for example. So a lot of what we do, it starts with first improving the local market.
Yeah,
that's really important for us before we are thinking about exporting and excess. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So the last minute, I'll give a minute each to yourself, Hilary, Deborah, and Francis. In East Africa, maybe you'll address the question and give your final remarks, but then do you feel we have the right governance systems? And I'm very, very particular because I know Zara mentioned about the traditional governance practices. Do they work? Can we still merge them with the current or modern governance or policy systems around wild oils and exploiting their full potential? So do we have the right governance systems? And what do we need to change? A minute each. I'll start with Hilary, then Zara, Francis, and Deborah. Hilary.
I think they have the policies have the right attitude in terms of policy increasing the use of dryland resources. However, in practice, I'm afraid there are more spokes in the wheel. It's more bureaucracy, more difficulties, more license, which are not pertaining to sustainability. So I would say, yes, the intentions are there, but the practices go against assisting.
Great. Zara?
Yeah, I would say that it's a work in progress. At the moment, generally, I think governments are more interested in sectors that provide a lot more income than the gums and resins sector. So the gums and resin sector is a little bit of an afterthought, but that has its advantages as well because we're not too much in the spotlight. So when there are rules and regulations required that we feel as the stakeholders that are necessary to be put in place by the government, we actually are in a position to be able to request that and push for that. And the institutions and the Ministry of Environment, for example, is actually pretty flexible in that sense. So we are part of the building of the governance that is required for this sector. So it's a little bit different to governments in other countries that are much older with very established institutions. In Somaliland, we're still able to influence what is done in the country.
Thank you. Francis?
Yesterday was the International Biodiversity Day, and the focus was on the Global Biodiversity Framework. And that framework actually calls for the sustainable legal trade of wild species for human benefit. So there is now an international mandate to do exactly what we've been talking about. Now, how do we translate that down to the realities in various countries? I think, Reinhard, there's a real opportunity to have this put more onto the agenda in the East African community, in COMESA, at the national level and so on. And I suspect through the GBF that there's a potential for international support for trade facilitation, capacity building, helping with governance and so on. So I do think the time is right in the policy space now to really be pushing wildlife use. And yes, we don't have to start with trophy hunting. We start with resin. We don't have to end with trophy hunting. That's not the issue. It's about people using the resources at the local level and building the livelihoods around it. And those resources for most people are plant-based.
Yeah, great. And I agree with you. The aspect is that the way we communicate about these issues. Deborah.
I think for once, Frank is entirely right. This is really largely about the opportunities are now. The plant sectors are typically less contentious, and therefore there are not so many legal barriers in regulatory terms within these countries. We need to be looking at the opportunities for trade. We need to be looking at the nature of non-trade barriers and how those can be non-tariff barriers, and how those can be overcome. And perhaps we need to be looking and activating also for the broader enabling environment in regulatory terms. What do we need to do in our countries in East Africa to make them more attractive for investment, to make them more attractive and easier to engage in global trade arrangements? But it's all opportunity.
Thank you very much. I do agree with you. Again, I agree with the aspect of communication and the way we make economic sense for the policy sector to listen to us. I think including also the wildlife aspect or the animal aspect, the way we do this and putting in the numbers, I think would make much more sense to the policymakers and potential investors. So thank you so much, everybody, for being part of this, and thank you to our dear, of course, Zara and Hilary and Deborah and Francis for this wonderful conversation. And we look forward to really making this work and this contributing, maybe hopefully to contribute to the bigger picture that we hope to achieve in the region. I will hand over the microphone to Mareth. Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mareth.
Thank you, everyone, and see you next week for our talk on wild fuels. Thanks so much. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.